Some people never recover from divorce. Jason Carter lifted his champagne glass, a smug smile tugging at the corner of his mouth as laughter rippled through the ballroom. Beneath the glittering crystal chandeliers of the Northgate Grand Hotel, more than 300 former classmates turned toward the woman standing alone near the back of the room. Claire Bennett felt every eye settle on her like a spotlight she had never asked for. The air smelled of expensive perfume, polished marble, and memories she had spent 10 years trying to forget. For a brief moment, the room seemed smaller. The music faded beneath the pounding of her heartbeat. Jason looked exactly the way he always wanted the world to see him. Confident, successful, untouchable. His tailored navy suit fit perfectly. His silver watch flashed beneath the ballroom lights whenever he moved his hand. The crowd loved him. They always had. Back in high school, he had been the golden boy. 10 years later, he still knew how to command a room. Claire lowered her eyes toward the stem of sparkling water in her hand. She had learned long ago that dignity often sounded like silence. Around her, clusters of former classmates exchanged uncomfortable glances. Some looked embarrassed for her. Others seemed entertained. A few simply watched, eager to see what would happen next. Jason took another sip before continuing. Life hits everyone differently, he said casually. Some people move forward. Others stay stuck in the past. More laughter followed. Softer this time. More hesitant. Yet it still landed like tiny stones against old scars. Claire felt the familiar ache in her chest. Not because his words surprised her. Jason had always known exactly where to aim. What surprised her was how little power they held now compared to years ago. 10 years earlier, she might have cried. 5 years earlier, she might have left the room. Tonight, she simply stood there, calm, composed, watching him reveal exactly who he was. The reunion committee had transformed the ballroom into a celebration of nostalgia. Large screens displayed photographs from senior year. Couples posed beneath gold banners. Waiters carried trays of miniature crab cakes and champagne flutes through the crowd. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the lights of downtown Chicago shimmered against the dark spring sky. Everything looked beautiful. Everything felt carefully polished. Yet beneath the elegant surface, old hierarchies still lingered. Old wounds still breathed. Claire noticed a photo flash across one of the giant screens. There she was at 18, bright-eyed, hopeful, standing beside Jason before graduation. The image felt like it belonged to strangers. That girl had believed love could survive ambition. She had believed loyalty mattered. She had believed Jason loved her. A sharp burst of laughter pulled her back to the present. Jason had gathered an audience now. Men slapped him on the shoulder. Women smiled politely. He thrived on attention the way some people needed oxygen. Claire wondered if he had planned this moment from the beginning. If the invitation itself had been another stage, another audience, another performance. Across the room, someone whispered her name. She turned slightly and saw Emily Ross watching from a nearby table. Concern flickered across her friend's face. Claire responded with a small, reassuring smile. She was fine. Better than fine, actually. Jason simply didn't know it yet. Neither did anyone else in the room. As the applause around him slowly faded, Jason raised his glass one final time. "Here's to second chances," he declared. More cheers followed. Claire's fingers tightened around her glass. Not out of anger, not out of fear, but because somewhere beyond the ballroom doors, beyond the laughter and assumptions and carefully constructed illusions, a truth was already moving toward this room. A truth that would change everything before the night was over. And when it arrived, the people laughing now would never look at Claire Bennett the same way again. 24 hours earlier, the reunion had existed only as a cream-colored envelope resting on Claire Bennett's kitchen counter. It sat beside a bowl of green apples and a neatly folded newspaper, ordinary things belonging to a life she had built with careful hands. Yet somehow that envelope dominated the room. The late afternoon sunlight spilling through the oversized windows of her condominium painted long golden stripes across the marble countertop, illuminating her name written in elegant script. Claire stared at it from across the room while the kettle hummed softly on the stove. For 3 days she had ignored it. 3 days pretending it was just another invitation. 3 days pretending the return address had not immediately transported her back to a version of herself she barely recognized anymore. Finally, she crossed the room and picked it up. The paper felt heavier than it should have. Her thumb traced the embossed crest of Northgate High School. 10-year reunion. The word seemed harmless enough. Most people would have smiled. Most people would have looked forward to reconnecting with old friends. For Claire, the invitation felt more like an unopened door leading straight into a storm she had spent years escaping. She carried it into the living room and sat beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Sailboats drifted across the water in the distance. The city skyline shimmered beneath a cloudless sky. Everything outside looked peaceful. Inside, old memories stirred. She opened the envelope slowly. The event details were exactly what she expected. Formal attire. Cocktails at 6. Dinner at 7. Dancing afterward. She could almost hear the music already. Almost see the faces. Some kind. Some curious. Some judgmental. And one face in particular. Jason Carter. Even after all these years, his name still carried weight. Not power. Not love. Just history. The kind that leaves fingerprints on your life long after it is gone. Claire folded the invitation and placed it on her lap. She should have thrown it away. She had every reason not to attend. Most of the people there had chosen sides during the divorce. Some had believed the rumors. Others had simply stayed silent. Silence, she had learned, often hurt just as much. A soft chime interrupted her thoughts. Her phone lit up on the coffee table. A message appeared from Emily Ross. "Are you going?" Claire stared at the screen. A second message followed almost immediately. "Please tell me you are not letting Jason scare you away." Claire smiled despite herself. Emily had always possessed an uncanny ability to say exactly what everyone else avoided. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard before she finally typed a reply. "I have not decided yet." 3 dots appeared instantly. Then another message. "That means yes." Claire laughed quietly. The sound surprised her. There had been a time when even hearing Jason's name would have ruined her entire day. Now the feeling was different. More distant. Like looking at an old scar and remembering the injury without feeling the pain. She rose from the sofa and walked toward the hallway mirror. For a moment, she studied her reflection. The woman staring back looked nothing like the frightened 28-year-old who had signed divorce papers years earlier. Her eyes were steadier now, her posture stronger. Life had reshaped her in ways no one from high school could possibly understand. Yet as she looked at herself, one question lingered. Was she ready to walk back into a room filled with people who only remembered who she used to be? The answer did not come immediately. But deep down, beneath the uncertainty, something else had begun to awaken. Not fear, not anger, something quieter, something stronger. The feeling that perhaps the woman entering that reunion would not be the one leaving it. The next morning arrived wrapped in silver clouds and the scent of rain drifting in from the lake. Claire stood barefoot in her kitchen, a mug of coffee warming her hands while Chicago moved slowly beyond the windows. Normally, mornings were her favorite part of the day. They belonged to no one else. No meetings. No expectations. No noise. Just peace. Today was different. Her phone rested face down beside her breakfast plate, yet she found herself glancing at it every few minutes. Eventually, curiosity won. She picked it up and opened social media for the first time in weeks. The reunion page appeared immediately. Dozens of new photos had been uploaded throughout the night. Smiling faces, family pictures, career updates, lives condensed into carefully selected images. Claire scrolled without much interest until a familiar face stopped her. Jason. There he was standing in front of a downtown law office, wearing a charcoal suit and a confident smile. Hundreds of people had reacted to the post. The comments were filled with admiration. "Congratulations. Incredible success. Proud of you." Claire stared at the photograph longer than she intended. Not because she missed him. That feeling had disappeared years ago. What unsettled her was how familiar the image felt. Jason had always understood presentation. He knew how to build a story people wanted to believe. Looking successful had often mattered more to him than being happy. She continued scrolling. More photographs appeared. Charity galas, business conferences, expensive restaurants. The life he had always dreamed of. Yet something about the smile never reached his eyes. Claire noticed it immediately. She doubted anyone else would. She had spent too many years learning the difference between Jason's public face and the private man behind it. A sudden memory surfaced. A winter evening years ago. Snow falling outside their apartment. Jason sitting at the dining table reviewing case files while she decorated a small Christmas tree alone. He had barely looked up all night. Success had always demanded his attention first. Everything else came second, including her. Claire locked her phone and set it aside. The old sadness lingered for only a moment before fading. She walked toward the bookshelf lining one wall of her living room. Framed photographs sat among the books and decorative pieces. Her gaze landed on a picture taken 3 years earlier during a charity fundraiser. She was smiling, truly smiling, not the careful smile she used to wear, the effortless kind that comes from feeling safe. Claire reached out and adjusted the frame slightly. The memories attached to that photograph were entirely different from the ones Jason represented. They belonged to a chapter of her life built on trust instead of performance. Her phone vibrated again. This time it was Emily. A new message appeared. "I just saw Jason posting about the reunion. Please promise me you are not backing out." Claire laughed softly and typed back, "I bought a dress yesterday." A reply arrived almost instantly. "Good. Then let him see exactly what he lost." Claire stared at the message for several seconds. Finally, she placed the phone down and looked back toward the city skyline. That was the difference between her and everyone else. They thought this night was about proving something to Jason. They thought the reunion was a battlefield. They thought victory meant making him jealous. Claire knew better. She had nothing left to prove to him. The only question was whether the rest of the room was ready to discover who she had become. By 6 o'clock the following evening, downtown Chicago glowed beneath a wash of amber light as Claire guided her car through familiar streets she had not driven in years. The closer she came to Northgate Grand Hotel, the more memories seemed to gather beside her like silent passengers. Storefronts had changed. Buildings had been renovated. Entire blocks looked different. Yet certain landmarks remained exactly the same, stubborn reminders of another life. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel and exhaled slowly. The sapphire blue dress hanging perfectly against her frame felt less like fashion and more like armor. Elegant, understated, impossible to ignore. When she finally pulled beneath the hotel's covered entrance, uniformed attendants moved efficiently beneath crystal chandeliers suspended above the driveway. Luxury cars lined the curb. Laughter drifted through revolving glass doors. For a brief moment, Claire remained seated inside the quiet sanctuary of her vehicle. 10 years. 10 years since graduation. 7 years since the divorce. Thousands of days spent rebuilding herself one careful choice at a time. She reached for her evening clutch and stepped into the cool spring air. The scent of fresh flowers mixed with expensive cologne greeted her immediately. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with gold light reflecting from towering crystal fixtures overhead. Music floated through the room, soft enough for conversation, yet loud enough to fill awkward silences. Round tables dressed in white linen stretched across polished marble floors. Large screens displayed photographs from high school years, cycling through. Smiling faces frozen in time. Claire felt dozens of eyes find her within seconds. Recognition moved through the crowd like a ripple across still water. Some faces brightened with genuine warmth. Others carried curiosity. A few displayed unmistakable surprise. She heard her name whispered more than once. Not loudly, just enough. Claire Bennett. Is that really her? She looks different. Before she could gather herself, a familiar voice cut through the noise. There you are. Emily Ross appeared from the crowd and wrapped her in a tight embrace. Relief softened Claire's shoulders immediately. Emily stepped back and looked her over with wide eyes. You look incredible, she said. I mean it. Absolutely incredible. Claire laughed. You say that every time you see me. Because it keeps being true. Emily linked an arm through hers and guided her farther into the ballroom. As they walked, Claire exchanged greetings with former classmates. Some conversations felt natural. Others felt carefully rehearsed. Many asked where she lived now, what she did for work, whether she had children, whether she still kept in touch with old friends. Nobody asked about Jason directly, but his name seemed to linger invisibly beneath every conversation. Eventually, they reached the cocktail area near the back of the room. Claire accepted a sparkling water from a passing server and turned toward the giant windows overlooking the city skyline. The view was breathtaking. Thousands of lights stretched across the horizon beneath the darkening sky. For the first time that evening, she felt herself relax. Then the room shifted. It happened almost imperceptibly. Conversation slowed. Heads turned. Attention migrated toward the ballroom entrance. Claire followed the movement instinctively. Across the room, A group of people had gathered around someone who had just arrived. Laughter erupted. Handshakes followed. Admiring smiles appeared. She did not need to see his face immediately to know who it was. Some people carried their own gravity. Jason had always been one of them. Emily glanced toward the entrance and muttered under her breath, "Showtime." Claire took a slow sip of sparkling water without looking away. Somewhere across the crowded ballroom, Jason Carter was making his entrance. And neither of them knew that before the night ended, everything the room believed about her would be turned upside down. Jason Carter moved through the ballroom exactly the way Claire remembered. Not hurried, not uncertain. Every step carried the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to being noticed. People gravitated toward him naturally. Former classmates shook his hand. Several laughed a little too hard at his jokes. Others listened with the kind of admiration reserved for people whose success had become part of their identity. Claire watched from across the room, feeling strangely detached from the scene unfolding before her. Years ago, she would have stood beside him during moments like this, smiling politely while he occupied the center of attention. Tonight, she felt like an observer watching an old movie she had seen too many times before. Emily leaned closer. "You still okay?" Claire nodded. "I am." And surprisingly, it was true. The anxiety that had followed her into the hotel had begun to fade. In its place was something else. Perspective. Time had a way of shrinking even the largest ghosts. Unfortunately, Jason seemed determined to remind everyone that some ghosts still deserved an audience. Within 20 minutes, he had gathered a crowd near the main bar. The reunion organizers had invited several alumni to share brief updates about their lives, careers, and accomplishments. It was supposed to be lighthearted, harmless, nostalgic. For Jason, it became a stage. He stood beneath the warm glow of the ballroom lights, holding a microphone while the crowd listened. His voice carried easily across the room. "It is incredible seeing everyone again," he began. Applause followed. He smiled modestly before continuing. 10 years ago, most of us had no idea where life would take us. More laughter, more agreement. Claire sipped her sparkling water quietly. Then came the shift. It was subtle enough that many people probably missed it. Jason began telling stories from their school days. Funny memories, old relationships, shared experiences. The crowd relaxed. People smiled. Then his gaze drifted across the room until it landed directly on Claire. She felt it immediately, the way prey notices a shadow overhead. "Life does not always go according to plan," Jason said casually. "Sometimes people surprise you." A few heads turned toward Claire. Jason smiled again. Some people thrive after setbacks. Others spend years trying to recover. The crowd responded with uncertain laughter. Claire remained still. Jason continued. "But that is life. We all take different paths." On the surface, the words sounded harmless, even generous. That was always his gift. The sharpest cuts hidden inside the softest sentences. Several classmates shifted uncomfortably. They understood exactly who he was talking about. Claire felt dozens of eyes settle on her once again. Waiting, watching, expecting some reaction. Embarrassment, anger, sadness. Instead, she simply met Jason's gaze. Calmly, the smile on his face faltered for the briefest fraction of a second. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Enough for Claire. Because Jason remembered something the rest of the room did not. She had once been the easiest person in the world to wound. Tonight she was not giving him that satisfaction. He looked away first. The conversation moved on. New topics replaced old ones. Yet the atmosphere had changed. People whispered quietly among themselves. Curiosity spread through the ballroom. Questions lingered in the air. What happened after the divorce? Was Claire really alone? Had Jason moved on completely? No one knew the truth. And as Claire stood beside the massive windows overlooking the city lights, she realized something almost amusing. Jason believed he was controlling the narrative. He believed he understood the story everyone had come to hear. What he did not know was that the most important chapter had not arrived yet. Standing in the ballroom, Claire kept her expression calm, but Jason's voice had already unlocked a door she rarely allowed herself to open. The laughter around her faded into the background as old memories surfaced with startling clarity. 7 years earlier, she had stood in the kitchen of a downtown apartment overlooking the Chicago River. Snow drifted past the windows while the city lights shimmered below. Back then, she believed she was living the life she had always wanted. Jason was building his legal career at an astonishing pace. Friends admired them. Family members praised them. From the outside, they looked successful. Perfect, even. The truth had been far quieter. It began with small things. Small comments disguised as advice. Small corrections disguised as concern. If Claire shared an idea, Jason often found a reason it would not work. If she celebrated an achievement, he reminded her it was not significant compared to larger goals. If she expressed frustration, he explained why her feelings were irrational. None of it seemed serious at first. That was what made it so effective. Like water slowly wearing away stone, the constant criticism happened gradually enough that she barely noticed herself changing. She stopped speaking up as often. She questioned her own instincts. She apologized for things that were not her fault. Whenever she confronted him, Jason always had an answer ready. He was only trying to help. He wanted her to be stronger, more confident, more ambitious. Claire remembered believing him. She remembered sitting across from him at expensive restaurants while he outlined plans for the future. Bigger homes, bigger careers, bigger lives. Jason spoke constantly about success. Yet somehow success always seemed to require Claire becoming smaller. The memory shifted. Another evening. Another conversation. She had been offered an opportunity through a respected consulting firm. A position she genuinely wanted. Jason listened quietly before shaking his head. He explained that the timing was wrong. His career required flexibility from both of them. Someone needed to manage the personal side of life while he focused on advancement. The argument sounded logical. Responsible, even. Claire declined the opportunity. Years later, she would remember that moment often. Not because of the job itself, but because it marked the beginning of a pattern. Every sacrifice seemed temporary. Every compromise seemed reasonable. Yet somehow the balance never shifted back. Jason's ambitions expanded while Claire's world grew smaller. By the time she finally realized what was happening, she no longer recognized the woman staring back at her in the mirror. The hardest part was not the disappointment. It was the confusion. She kept waiting for the version of Jason she had fallen in love with to return. The thoughtful young man from high school. The one who made her laugh until her stomach hurt. The one who once promised they would build a future together. But people do not always become who they promise to be. Sometimes they become who they truly are. Across the ballroom, present-day laughter pulled Claire back to reality. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Conversations filled the room once more. She blinked slowly and took a measured breath. The memories still existed. The hurt still belonged to her history. But history no longer controlled her. And somewhere beyond those ballroom doors, a future Jason had never imagined was moving steadily closer. The most painful chapter of Claire's life had not been the end of her marriage. It had been everything that came afterward. Long before the legal documents were finalized, she already sensed the foundation beneath her life beginning to crack. Conversations with Jason became colder. Longer silences settled between them. The apartment that once felt like home slowly transformed into a place where she felt like a visitor. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. Rain streaked the windows of their condominium while gray clouds hung low over the city. Jason sat across from her at the dining table, his expression calm in a way that felt strangely rehearsed. Claire remembered the ticking clock on the wall, the untouched cup of coffee growing cold beside her hand, the way her stomach tightened before he even spoke. Some part of her already knew. The conversation itself lasted less than an hour. The consequences lasted years. By evening, the future she had imagined no longer existed. Friends she thought would remain loyal quietly drifted away. Invitations stopped arriving. Phone calls became less frequent. People who once celebrated her suddenly seemed uncertain how to speak to her. It was as though divorce carried an invisible label that made others uncomfortable. The loneliness surprised her more than the heartbreak. She moved into a small apartment on the north side of the city. Compared to her former home, it felt impossibly quiet. No floor-to-ceiling windows. No skyline views. No elegant dinner parties. Just a modest space with beige walls and the distant sound of traffic filtering through the glass. During those first months, even simple decisions felt exhausting. Some mornings she stared at the ceiling for an hour before finding the energy to leave bed. She questioned everything. Her judgment, her memories, even her worth. Jason's voice lingered in her thoughts long after he was gone. Every criticism, every dismissal, every suggestion that she was somehow not enough. There were days she almost believed him. What saved her was not a dramatic breakthrough. It was something much smaller. One ordinary morning, she looked around her apartment and realized she was waiting for permission from someone who was no longer there. Permission to try again. Permission to fail. Permission to build a life that belonged entirely to her. For the first time in years, she stopped asking what Jason would think. She enrolled in professional development courses. She accepted consulting projects. She reconnected with former colleagues who valued her talent. Progress came slowly, measured in inches rather than miles. Yet each step carried her farther from the woman she used to be. Months turned into years. Confidence returned gradually. Like sunlight after a long winter, it appeared so slowly she barely noticed until one day everything looked different. Back in the ballroom, Claire watched classmates mingle beneath the chandeliers and felt a strange sense of gratitude. Not for the pain, never for the pain, but for the strength that emerged afterward. Jason believed their story ended when he walked away. He believed he understood what happened next. Across the room, he laughed with a group of former classmates, completely unaware that the woman he remembered no longer existed. The version of Claire he thought he had left behind was gone, and the woman standing here tonight was only beginning to reveal herself. There had been a moment, nearly 4 years after the divorce, when Claire came dangerously close to giving up on the future altogether. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday in October. Rain tapped softly against the windows of her office while unfinished reports sat scattered across her desk. Outside, people hurried beneath umbrellas. Inside, exhaustion settled heavily across her shoulders. She had spent years rebuilding, years proving herself, years working harder than anyone knew. Yet success still felt distant enough to touch without ever fully reaching. That afternoon, after another project fell through unexpectedly, Claire remained alone in the office long after everyone else left. The city lights gradually illuminated the darkness beyond her windows. For the first time in years, doubt returned. Not the sharp doubt Jason had planted during their marriage. This was quieter, more dangerous, the kind that whispered perhaps all the effort was meaningless. Perhaps some people simply never recovered completely. She sat there staring at the skyline as traffic flowed beneath her like rivers of red and white light. Then her phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. Under normal circumstances, she would have ignored it. Something made her answer. The voice on the other end belonged to a representative from a major investment group. Months earlier, Claire had submitted a proposal for a consulting initiative she never expected anyone to notice. Apparently, someone had noticed. More importantly, someone wanted to discuss it. The meeting took place 2 weeks later in a glass tower overlooking downtown Chicago. Claire remembered feeling out of place as she crossed the marble lobby. Men and women in tailored suits moved through the building with practiced confidence. She carried a simple leather portfolio and tried to ignore the nervous flutter in her stomach. The conference room occupied the 42nd floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city beneath a clear autumn sky. Several executives sat around the table reviewing documents. Claire expected another polite rejection, another conversation ending with promises to stay in touch. Instead, she found herself answering thoughtful questions from people who seemed genuinely interested in her ideas. For nearly 90 minutes, they discussed strategy, growth opportunities, and long-term development plans. Nobody interrupted her. Nobody dismissed her perspective. Nobody suggested her ambitions were unrealistic. When the meeting finally ended, Claire gathered her papers and prepared to leave. Then one of the executives asked her to stay for a moment longer. The others filed out. The room grew quiet. Through the windows, sunlight reflected from the river below like liquid silver. Claire waited uncertainly. The executive smiled and slid a business card across the table. "Someone would like to meet you," he said. She glanced down at the card. A name was printed beneath an understated company logo. Ethan Blackwood. Claire had heard of him, of course. Everyone had. Newspapers called him one of the most influential investors in the country. Business magazines described him as brilliant, private, and impossible to predict. She stared at the card for several seconds before looking back up. "Why would he want to meet me?" she asked. The executive's smile widened slightly. "Because he read your proposal himself." Back in the ballroom, Claire felt her pulse quicken at the memory. Across the room, Jason continued enjoying the attention of former classmates. Completely unaware that the turning point of Claire's story had begun with a single business card carrying a name he would soon recognize. Claire expected Ethan Blackwood to be intimidating. The media described him as a financial visionary whose decisions could shift entire industries. Business journals analyzed his investments the way sports commentators analyze championship games. By the time she stepped into his office 3 days after receiving the invitation, she had prepared herself for arrogance, distance, and the kind of calculated confidence that often accompanied extraordinary success. Instead, she found a man standing beside a wall of windows overlooking the Chicago skyline, pouring 2 cups of coffee. The office itself was surprisingly understated. No excessive displays of wealth. No oversized portraits. No attempt to impress visitors. Just clean lines, natural light, and shelves filled with books. Ethan turned as she entered and offered a polite smile. "Claire Bennett," he said. "Thank you for coming." His voice was calm, unhurried, nothing like the larger-than-life figure she expected. For the next 2 hours, they discussed her proposal. Not in broad terms. In detail, Ethan challenged assumptions, asked thoughtful questions, explored possibilities she had never considered. More importantly, he listened, truly listened. Claire could not remember the last time someone had taken her ideas so seriously. When the meeting ended, Ethan surprised her again. "I would like to move forward," he said. Claire blinked. "With the proposal?" A faint smile touched his face. "With all of it." That conversation changed everything. What began as a professional partnership evolved into something neither of them anticipated. Over the following months, Claire worked closely with Ethan and his team. The initiative expanded beyond its original scope. New opportunities emerged. New investments followed. For the first time in her career, Claire found herself sitting in rooms where her voice carried genuine weight. Her ideas generated results. Her strategies produced growth. Her confidence returned stronger than before because it was no longer dependent on anyone else's approval. Ethan became an unexpected constant in that process. He never treated her as someone who needed rescuing. He never acted as though her success belonged to him. When projects succeeded, he credited the team. When obstacles appeared, he focused on solutions instead of blame. The contrast was impossible to ignore. One evening, nearly a year after their first meeting, Claire found herself standing beside Ethan on a rooftop terrace during a company event. The city stretched beneath them in every direction. Lights shimmered across the river. A warm summer breeze carried distant sounds from the streets below. They spoke for nearly an hour about everything except business. Family, travel, books, dreams they once abandoned. For the first time, Claire saw the man behind the reputation. Not the billionaire. Not the investor. Simply Ethan. Thoughtful, kind, steady. The friendship deepened naturally after that. Then came trust. Then came something neither of them rushed to name. Looking back, Claire often realized the most important thing Ethan gave her was not opportunity. It was perspective. He saw strengths she had forgotten existed. He challenged her to believe in herself before she fully knew how. Across the ballroom in the present, Claire glanced toward the entrance instinctively. The memory lingered like sunlight warming old scars. Somewhere beyond those doors, the man who had helped change the course of her life was drawing closer. And when he arrived, the carefully constructed assumptions filling this room would begin to crumble one by one. The evening continued moving forward, but the atmosphere inside the ballroom had changed in ways most people could not yet identify. Conversations still flowed. Glasses still clinked. Music still drifted softly beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. Yet an invisible tension now lingered beneath every interaction. Claire felt it whenever someone glanced her way. Curiosity had taken root. Jason noticed it too. That was why he crossed the room toward her less than 10 minutes later. He approached with the same practiced confidence that had carried him through courtrooms, boardrooms, and social gatherings for years. Several former classmates immediately shifted their attention toward them. Not openly, not obviously, but enough. People sensed a story unfolding. Jason stopped a few feet away and smiled. To anyone watching, the expression appeared friendly. Claire knew better. "Claire," he said warmly. "It has been a long time." "It has," she replied. Her voice remained calm. Jason nodded as though they were old friends reconnecting after years apart. "You look well." "Thank you. Chicago still treating you okay?" The question sounded innocent. Yet Claire immediately recognized the familiar rhythm. Jason was not asking for information. He was establishing an audience. Several people nearby had quietly stopped talking altogether. They listened without appearing to listen. Chicago has been very good to me, Claire answered. Something flickered behind Jason's eyes. Brief disappointment. He had expected hesitation, maybe discomfort. Instead, he found confidence. He recovered quickly. That is good to hear, he said. I always worried you might have a difficult time after everything. There it was. The first strike disguised as concern. Claire almost smiled. Some habits never changed. That is thoughtful of you, she replied. Jason laughed softly. Well, life affects everyone differently. Some people adapt faster than others. A few nearby classmates exchanged uncomfortable looks. Even they could hear the implication now. Jason continued before anyone could interrupt. I suppose resilience is not something you can predict. Claire studied him carefully. 7 years ago, comments like these would have left her questioning herself for days. Tonight they felt strangely small, like echoes from a distant room. You are right, she said. People can surprise you. For the first time, Jason seemed uncertain about where the conversation was heading. The uncertainty lasted only a second. Then he smiled again. I am glad you came tonight. Really, I think it is important not to hide from the past. The words hung in the air between them. Claire heard a quiet intake of breath from someone standing nearby. Jason had delivered exactly what he intended. One final reminder that he believed she was the wounded one. The woman recovering. The woman left behind. Claire held his gaze steadily. I agree, she said. The past teaches us a lot. Jason opened his mouth to respond. Then his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. Whatever he saw seemed to reassure him. His posture relaxed immediately. Confidence returned. Excuse me for a moment, he said. There is someone I need to greet. He stepped away, leaving Claire standing beside the windows overlooking the city. Emily appeared almost instantly. Are you okay? Claire nodded. Perfectly. Across the ballroom, Jason disappeared into the crowd wearing the satisfied expression of a man convinced he was still controlling the narrative. He had no idea that the most important arrival of the evening was now only minutes away. And when those ballroom doors opened, everything he thought he understood about Claire Bennett would begin to unravel. The first sign was not the opening of the ballroom doors. It was the sudden shift in attention. Conversations began to falter one by one. Heads turned toward the entrance. Even the waitstaff seemed momentarily distracted. Claire felt it before she saw it. The same way people sense a change in weather before the clouds arrive. Across the room, Jason paused in the middle of a conversation and glanced toward the doorway. His confident expression remained intact, but curiosity flickered across his face. The ballroom entrance opened quietly. No dramatic announcement followed. No spotlight. No fanfare. Yet within seconds, recognition spread through the crowd. Several guests exchanged startled looks. Others whispered names beneath their breath. Claire watched as a tall figure stepped inside, wearing a perfectly tailored black suit. Ethan Blackwood moved through the room with the calm assurance of someone who had nothing to prove. Unlike Jason, he did not command attention by seeking it. Attention simply followed him. The effect was immediate. Former classmates who had spent the evening discussing promotions and business achievements suddenly found themselves staring at one of the most recognizable figures in American finance. Emily's eyes widened. No way, she whispered. Around them, murmurs rippled through the ballroom. Some guests looked confused. Others clearly recognized him. One man near the bar nearly dropped his drink when he realized who had just entered. Ethan acknowledged a few greetings with polite nods, but never slowed his pace. His focus remained fixed on a single point across the room. Claire. Her pulse quickened despite herself. Not because she was nervous, because seeing him always carried the same quiet sense of certainty. Through every challenge, every victory, every unexpected turn, Ethan had remained steady, reliable, real. The crowd unconsciously parted as he crossed the ballroom floor. Jason noticed it too. Claire saw the exact moment recognition struck him. His posture stiffened. His eyes narrowed slightly. He knew the name. Everyone in business circles knew the name. What he did not understand was why Ethan Blackwood was attending a high school reunion filled with people he had never met. The answer was walking toward him. Ethan stopped directly in front of Claire. For a brief moment, neither spoke. The noise of the ballroom seemed distant. Then his face softened into a genuine smile. The kind reserved for people who matter. Sorry I am late, he said. The flight was delayed. Several people standing nearby exchanged puzzled glances. Flight. Ethan reached for Claire's hand naturally. as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world. The gesture was simple, yet it carried enough meaning to leave half the room staring. Claire smiled back. "You made it. I told you I would." Around them, confusion deepened. Jason stood frozen several yards away, watching the interaction unfold. Questions raced across faces throughout the ballroom. How did Claire know Ethan Blackwood? Why was he here? Why did they seem so comfortable together? Nobody had answers yet. But for the first time all evening, the narrative Jason believed he controlled was slipping beyond his reach. And the truth was only seconds away from revealing itself. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The ballroom seemed suspended between one heartbeat and the next. Ethan still held Claire's hand, completely unaware of the shock spreading through the room because to him, there was nothing unusual about standing beside her. To everyone else, it was a revelation unfolding in real time. Jason finally crossed the distance separating them. The confidence he carried all evening remained visible, but something underneath it had shifted. Curiosity, disbelief, perhaps even concern. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, extending a hand. "Jason Carter. We have not had the opportunity to meet." Ethan shook his hand politely. "Good to meet you." Several people nearby leaned closer without pretending otherwise. The entire ballroom seemed desperate to understand what was happening. Jason smiled. "I was not aware you knew Claire." Claire noticed the careful phrasing immediately. Not aware you knew Claire. As though their connection could only exist as a coincidence. As though Ethan belonged in one world and Claire belonged in another. Ethan glanced toward Claire before looking back at Jason. "I know her very well." The answer was simple, direct, yet the effect was immediate. More whispers spread through the crowd. Emily stood a few feet away wearing an expression that suggested she was enjoying every second of this. Jason laughed lightly. Small world. Ethan's expression remained calm. Not really. The room grew quieter. Claire could practically feel people holding their breath. Jason shifted his weight slightly. "So how exactly do you two know each other?" This time the question arrived with less subtlety. Around them, dozens of conversations had stopped completely. Crystal glasses rested untouched on tables. Music continued playing softly in the background, but nobody seemed to hear it anymore. Claire watched Ethan carefully. There was no arrogance in him. No desire to embarrass anyone. No interest in winning some invisible contest. That was one of the things she admired most about him. He never needed attention to validate himself. Ethan looked at her again, and a small smile appeared. Warm, genuine, familiar. Then he turned toward Jason. "Claire and I have worked together for years," he said. "She is one of the most talented people I have ever met." Surprise flashed across several faces. Jason's smile tightened slightly. Compliments were not what he expected. Ethan continued. "In fact, many of our most successful projects would not exist without her." The whispers intensified. Claire noticed people exchanging confused glances. They were trying to reconcile two versions of the same woman. The woman Jason had quietly portrayed throughout the evening, and the woman standing beside one of the most respected business leaders in the country. Jason opened his mouth as if searching for a response. Before he found one, Ethan added a final sentence. The sentence that changed everything. "And of course, there is another reason I am here tonight." He gently squeezed Claire's hand. Then he smiled. "I came because my wife asked me to." Silence fell across the ballroom. Complete silence. The kind that arrives when reality suddenly shifts beneath people's feet. Claire saw the shock register one face at a time. Emily's eyes widened. Several classmates stared openly. One woman nearly covered her mouth. Across from them, Jason simply stood there, motionless. The words seemed to echo through the room long after Ethan spoke them. My wife. Not colleague. Not friend. Not business partner. Wife. The truth Jason never imagined. The truth nobody expected. And as the silence deepened around them, Claire realized something remarkable. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel vindicated. She felt free. The silence eventually broke, but nothing returned to the way it had been before. Conversations resumed in cautious fragments. Whispers traveled from table to table. People glanced toward Claire with entirely different eyes now, as though they were seeing her for the first time. Jason remained where he stood, managing a polite smile that no longer reached his eyes. Years earlier, Claire might have taken satisfaction in that moment. Tonight she felt only clarity. Ethan never released her hand. Not because she needed protection, but because standing beside her was the most natural thing in the world to him. As the evening continued, more classmates approached. Some offered congratulations. Others asked how long she and Ethan had been married. A few admitted they had completely misjudged her situation. Claire answered graciously. There was no bitterness in her voice, no desire to embarrass anyone. The truth was powerful enough on its own. An hour later, the reunion organizer stepped onto the small stage near the center of the ballroom to thank everyone for attending. Laughter and applause followed. Then he smiled toward Claire and Ethan. Before we finish tonight, he said, I want to recognize 2 alumni whose work has had an extraordinary impact beyond this room. Curious murmurs spread through the crowd. The organizer continued. Many of you know Ethan Blackwood's accomplishments. What you may not know is that one of the strategic initiatives that helped launch Blackwood Capital's most successful expansion was developed by someone sitting here tonight. He turned toward Claire. Claire Bennett. The room fell. Quiet once more. She was not only a key architect behind those projects, he added. She became one of the firm's earliest partners and remains one of its most influential leaders. Shock registered across dozens of faces. Claire heard someone whisper, partner? Another voice repeated the word as though trying to understand it. Across the ballroom, Jason stared in stunned silence. The realization arrived slowly but completely. Claire had not been rescued by success. She had helped create it. She had not stepped into someone else's world. She had built her own. Ethan glanced at her with quiet pride. Not surprise. Not admiration born from a single moment. The pride of someone who had witnessed every late night, every difficult decision, every hard-earned victory. When the applause began, it spread through the ballroom like a rising tide. Claire stood there surrounded by light, music, and the echoes of a past that no longer defined her. For years, she had wondered whether returning to this room would reopen old wounds. Instead, it revealed how completely she had healed. Later that evening, she and Ethan stepped outside beneath the cool Chicago night sky. The city glittered around them. Traffic hummed in the distance. Behind them, the reunion continued. Ahead of them stretched a future neither needed to prove to anyone. Claire looked back at the hotel one final time. Somewhere inside, Jason Carter was still trying to understand what he had lost. But Claire no longer carried that story with her. She turned toward Ethan and smiled. Then together they walked into the night. Jason had spent years believing he was the author of her ending. He never realized he was only a chapter. Claire had written the rest herself.